Hi, I'm Laura, a Canadian cross-stitcher out of Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. Sometimes I follow a pattern and sometimes I follow my nose, finishing projects, rescuing abandoned projects, and generally stretching my creative boundaries. I never know what I'll be getting into next, but I'm happy to share the good, the bad, the ugly, and especially the funny. Welcome to my creative space. If you saw my Flosstube 5 video back in March, I was thrift store shopping with my friends in Sarnia when I found a partially started crewel kit. I was really drawn to the orange cat and felt I could do something with it, even though I'd never done any crewel work before. At the same store, I also found some great fabric with colors that went well with it. When I got it home, I had a closer look. It seemed to have all the yarn, and it looked to be in pretty good condition, and I really couldn't beat the price. It even had a yarn needle that I could finish the cat with. I wasn't sure about the yarn. It seemed to have a bunch of debris tangled in it, maybe dirt, maybe food crumbs, I don't know. It grossed me out, so I threw it out and I bought a bit of new yarn. The canvas was in great shape, except for a couple of stains that I thought, well, maybe I can get it out, and some old crumbling tape on the edges. I decided to get another look at the fabric with the canvas. I was super happy with the way the colors went together. So I knew at this point I was for sure going to make a project tote with it once I finished stitching the canvas. So I popped it into one of my DIY frames and had a closer look at the window area. Since I don't do crewel work, I'd never seen this strategy before. The mesh was stitched right into the canvas. It's pretty genius, actually. It's a neat way to get another background color to fill open areas that don't get stitched. I think the idea here was to mimic sunlight coming through the stained glass window. I took a pair of sharp scissors and trimmed away the excess. Here's a close-up look at the mesh. It was folded over into 2 layers and it's a pale golden yellow. And then I was ready to start stitching, but there was no pattern with the kit. So I decided to have a look on Google. There were a few images of this kit so I could see what it was supposed to look like finished. Turns out it's called A Perfect Morning, designed by Barbara Jennings. And I can see the old tag of $21. But they were selling it for $54.91 on eBay, Canadian. And I got it for $5.99. I opened the image in a new tab to have a better look at what the finished piece is supposed to look like and zoomed in. And then I printed off a copy of the picture that I kept with me as I picked out floss colors to stitch with. I ended up putting it in a bigger frame so I could see the whole thing. I filled in the remaining crewel stitches in the cream stained glass areas and the orange in the cat, and I switched to cross stitches for the hanging plant and the basket. From there I decided to experiment on the taller plant with different blackwork stitches and half crosses on the wicker basket it sits in. Here's a close-up of the cross stitches meeting the yarn areas. And here's the finished piece. Because I wasn't sure if the printed ink would wash out, I tried to cover over all the lines as much as I could. I ended up also experimenting with blackwork stitches and adding gold thread on the trunk. And a sort of lazy daisy stitch for the flower basket. Let me give you some close-ups of all the stitching. With the hanging basket, I went right over the yarn. The back stitching helped a lot. I loved how the cat turned out. My husband has taken to calling him Garfield. For the most part, I was able to hide a lot of the printed ink under the floss. But there are definitely a few places where it was trickier, and you can see it peeking out from under the fern and on the table there. I had to improvise with the lazy daisies because of the printed outlines and some of the spaces between the flowers. I wasn't sure at first if I'd made the right decision on the trunk blackwork, but in the end I was happy enough with it. Same for the half crosses on the basket. I was going for a wicker look. And then it was time to find out if I could get the stains out and if the printed ink would come out. I was a bit worried because if I couldn't get the stains out, they would be visible because of the position of the hanging basket, but it needed to be cleaned. So here we go with the usual hand washing process. I started off pretty gently, just agitating it and rubbing the fabric together, which really wasn't doing much. So I pulled out an old toothbrush, which didn't do much. So I added some dishwashing detergent, which didn't do much. so I grabbed some heavy-duty stain remover. Which did a little more, but not enough. So I added some white vinegar. At about this point, I realized it wasn't going to come out any cleaner than it was. So I gave it a good rinse. And rolled it in a towel to squeeze it out. And here's where we're at. It would still be visible with the edges brought in. This is how the wash water looked. I decided to let it dry and reassess, but I still wasn't happy with it. So here's where things went a little off the rails. Yep, that's right. I threw it in the washing machine and it did not go well. At least it didn't go well for the yarn in the window area. Yes, the stain was much better, but the cream-colored yarn felted up and shrunk. Not everywhere, thankfully. The circles were mostly okay, but the window was quite puckered. All things considered, it wasn't a terrible outcome. Luckily, Garfield was relatively unscathed, just a bit fuzzier. I think having bought new yarn helped. Oh, but that window. Yeah, it looks bad. Nope, the ink didn't come out. But it was a little less noticeable, and I was fine with that. So I took it out. I put it back in the frame to stretch it back out, and I trimmed the felted areas where I could. And then I cross-stitched in some replacements and re-backstitched. The colors aren't an exact match, but I think they work well enough with the piece. And once it was dry, most of the stains were gone, except for one that was still noticeable in the top right. But I think it might be high up enough now to crop it out when I stitch up the bag. So I first needed to figure out my measurements. I decided to put a pin at the point where I'd crop out the stain to help figure out the height. I knew I'd be cropping out some of the stitching at the top and the bottom, and I was fine with that. I put the fabric across the point at which I'd cropped the top to see how it looked, and I liked it. Here's a closer look at the critter fabric. It was about a half a yard, and I paid $4.19 for it. I absolutely love it. It's got foxes and squirrels and trees, and it's so pretty. The second fabric is also nice. It's a soft fuzzy plaid with a bit of give to it. It was 3 yards for $5.99. Can't get over how well they look together, and they were random finds at opposite ends of the store. How lucky was that? So then I need to figure out which would go at the top and which would go at the bottom. So I flipped them around a couple of times before deciding. In the end, this was my favorite. I decided to measure the size of my current frame to make sure it would fit well and help me decide on my remaining measurements. What am I stitching, you ask? Why, it's You Had Me at Flamingo by Hands On Design. I have plans for this cutie pie. Here are the dimensions I came up with. My cross stitch is 13 by 16. I want the finished bag to be about 18 by 20. So I'll need 2 side pieces, a bottom piece in contrasting fabric, and a top piece. The sides will be 13 inches, so I'll make the top 1.5 and the bottom 3.5 in height to add up to 18. The sides will be 2 inches each in width, and the top and bottom 20, and I'll add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to all my measurements. I carefully measured and pinned my side pieces to the cross stitch with right sides together, and then I cut off the excess canvas. After a bit of internal debate, I cut through the stitching. I stitched each side and pressed my seams. And then top stitched. I pinned on the top and bottom pieces and stitched them together. Then pressed my seams and then top stitched everything. And here's how it's looking so far. I was able to crop out the faint stain at the top, and I'm loving the color combinations. I can't believe how good they look with each other. I don't think I could have done better if I'd gone with the finished piece to pick out fabrics to match the yarn and the floss colors. For the backing, I cut pieces from the plaid and printed fabrics to match the front dimensions and pinned and stitched them together. And I pressed the seams down and top stitched. For the inside of the bag, I cut out pieces from the same plaid fabric since I had so much of it. I used an old fuzzy blanket as an extra layer to add some weight and padding to the bag. The thing about fuzzy fabric is it gets everywhere when you cut it. I usually give each piece a good shake outside. I layered together the lining, inner layer, and front pieces, and I pinned them all around and then trimmed off the excess inner layer. And then I repeated the process for the back of the bag. Check out the fluff that shakes outside. It's like snow. I made 2 straps from the contrasting fabric. I just folded it in half and pressed it, and folded it in again and pressed, and then stitched it. I quilted the layers together with a few rows of stitching, then trimmed back the excess inner layer on the top edge, and then positioned the straps between the layers before folding them in and pinning in place. And then I stitched the top edge. I did the same for the front, put them together, and zigzagged the edges to prevent fraying. And we're done. This was quite the journey from thrift store to tote bag. But I really love this kind of project. It's a bit out of the ordinary and inspires my creativity. It's also practical but whimsical. And it takes something that might have just sat in the store and turns it into something fun that has a fun little story to go with it. I hope you enjoyed taking this journey with me, and I hope you also get the opportunity to do more of what you love. Bye for now.